In this video, I'm going to show you how to prepare image files for displacement in Rhino. So we're going to start in Photoshop. And I'm going to start with an image pulled from the web. I did a Google search for granulated plastic and found this one, which looks good. So I'm just going to save this image, and let me do that, and I'm going to pause the tutorial while I do that. Okay, I've saved that image as Plastic Original. I'm opening it in Photoshop, and as you can see, it has, it's a stock photo, so it has some watermarking on it. The first thing I'm going to do is just crop it. Image and crop. And I'm going to deal with the watermark issue as I deal with the tiling issue. So the first thing that we need to do, we could use this image as is. However, it's going to be better if we create a seamlessly tiling image. And in order to do that, we need to offset the image first in Photoshop. We can do that with Filter, and if we go down to Other, select Offset, and I've got lucky here. By default, it's really clear where we're seeing the offsets, and so we can just hit OK. Sometimes you may have to play around with this and shift the image a little bit. You can see as I move this around, it's shifting it up and down. But the important thing is just to get the seam visible within the image. And now that those seams are visible, I'm going to hit OK. There's a tool called the Healing Brush tool, actually the Spot Healing Brush tool. We want to click that. And you can change the size of the brush up here and its hardness. This size is looking pretty good. So you could see that relative to the image, it's, I don't know, what, like 5% or 2% of the entire size of the image. And as I hold down on this, I can erase that seam. And you may have to experiment with different strokes, right? But by going through this, you'll be able to erase the seam. Now this image is a little tricky because it has, there's a pretty big depth of focus issue. So things in the foreground are really close and sharp, and things in the background are a little blurry. So I may have to do some other editing on this issue to get it to be usable. But what you can also see here is that I can use the spot healing brush to get rid of these watermark issues. So I'm just going to keep using that, moving around, and getting rid of these things, trying to kind of blend the image in such a way that everything goes together cohesively, sort of like it looks like one thing. And I think it's starting to look pretty good over here. This is not going to be perfect. I'm also seeing that it's starting to repeat things, like I'm getting shapes that I can identify over and over again. So I'm going to try to get rid of that and just sort of move down in here. This may not be perfect, but I think it's going to be good enough for the purposes of the tutorial. So that looks good enough for now. And so at this point, I'm going to save it as a copy. So save as plastic red. We'll call it plastic tile red. And if I wanted to create a different color, I could hit Control U on the keyboard, and I will get this hue and saturation dialog. You can always change the saturation here, desaturate, saturate it more, or you can change the hue. So if I wanted it to be more of a bright green color, or maybe like a sort of a gold color, I'll save it like that. So I'm going to hit that and then save as. going to save it as plastic tile gold. Hit OK. Sorry, the OK dialog was on my other screen. Now I actually want to prepare an image for the bump map. So to do that, I need to go to Filter, 3D, and the first one, Generate Bump Height Map. And there's also a Generate Normal Map, which we'll look at. But the Generate Bump Height Map, there are bump maps and displacement maps in 3D software programs. And if you're using V-Ray, you would probably use both a normal map and the bump map. For Rhino displacement, you really only need the bump map, but I'll show you how to generate both, because the normal map generates a very interesting image, which can be cool to use as a texture on your object. So I'm going to go ahead and click Generate Bump Height Map here. And 3D is being pulled up. And you can see the bump map being generated, the image file. And then this dialog also pops up. And you see how that would wrap a sphere. There are other objects down here that you can look at. A cone, for example. It's taking it a minute. Or I don't know, there's a hat, if that's useful. These are odd. I'm going to go back to the or a cube, of course. So it's switching over to cube. You can see that it's not, I don't know why it's not applied to all of the faces, but, oh, cube wrap, that's it. There we go. Now it's wrapping all of the faces. So if we look at this, now we can we can look at the effects of blurring that texture, that bump map, having less of a blur, changing the detail scale. You can also here drag these little arrows up and down to, doesn't seem to be having a huge effect. Oh, there, that one did. The high contrast is having a pretty big effect here. So this is, you can play around with this. It will give you some good settings by default, but you can tweak these and maybe you want to try different settings. But this looks decent, so I'm going to hit OK. And this generates our bump map. So I'm going to save this as plastic tile bump. Okay. Bring over my dialog here. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to go back to the original image, plastic tile red, and I'm going to now filter this again and generate the normal map. Again, if you're using V-Ray for rendering, this will be useful, but it can also be useful because it just generates a very interesting image. And so now I could, again, I have a dialog here where I could play around with the different settings, sort of making it smoother or making it bumpier and lumpier, which seems like a good idea. I'm getting more detail. Let's see what happens if I drag this up. Okay, now I'm getting lots of bumpiness here. This is not doing so much. Low. If I bring this down, bring it up. Okay, if I bring this lower. Okay, now I've got a lot of bump. And you can see that this image is getting more saturated. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to save this. This is actually known as a normal map. So I am going to save this as plastic tile normal. And then because I may use this as a cool texture for my objects, I might go ahead and make a variation on this with the saturation, changing the saturation. So Control U is the saturation getting is the hotkey for saturation. So that's pretty interesting. I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus sign here on the layer, not that. Get rid of that. Actually, under history, if I hit the plus sign, it's going to make a copy. I'm going to make a new one here, different color, change the saturation. Okay. And then I'm going to hit plus sign on the history again, generate another one, and then I'm going to see if I can blend these two things. So I'm going to take the pink one, put it over the green one, and then I'm going to make a layer mask on the pink one. So a layer mask works. Let me go ahead and make that mask. So I'm going to click this button, Add Layer Mask, which is in the Layers dialog in Photoshop. And by default, it makes a solid white layer mask. And now the way this works is that what is white will show up as whatever the contents of the layer happen to be. And then if I start painting something black, so let's see if this works the way that I'm expecting it to. If I go to my paintbrush, and my paintbrush is set to, let me get a normal brush here. Right, so now I'm painting with black. You can see my color is set to black here. As I paint with black, I can reveal what's underneath. So I'm going to get rid of that. But that could be an interesting way to kind of selectively reveal what's underneath to get different colors. But the other thing that I could do is go to gradient. Hold on, I have to cough. The hotkey for unpausing the video also locks the layer. So, okay, now I'm done coughing and I figured that out. So now we're going to try just using a gradient instead of, so I could do this with the brush, but I'm going to try it with the gradient. So if I come over here to gradient tool, I'm going to click gradient, and you can see that there are different ways I can set it. By default, it's going to be a linear gradient. So as I drag this across the image, you can see down here what's happening with the mask. So black is on the left, white is on the right, and where it's black, things go transparent and reveal it, to reveal the image underneath. I'm going to undo that, and I can also change from a linear gradient to a spherical gradient, which is great for our image because we want this to tile, right? So if we go from left to right, things aren't going to tile properly. But if I go from the center out, then you can see these edges, it's going to be pinker here and pinker on the bottom. So you have to imagine that this is all going to tile. So if I just try this gradient, I should like the other one better. That one might work, but let me try that. Put it more in the center. Too small. That one looks pretty good. So let's stick with this one. But basically I have the, you can see the way that the layer mask is working here with the gradient. So I have a dark circle in the middle and it kind of fades out towards the edges. So I can blend between these two different color options. So I'm going to go ahead and then just flatten this. So I think I should be able to do that by, just go to layer, flatten image, and then I'm going to save these three images. So I'm going to save the pink one, the green one, and then the blended one. And I'm going to pause the video, save these images just as JPEGs, and then I'm going to hop into Rhino. So that so I'll meet you in Rhino in just a second. Okay, so I'm over in Rhino with the object that I want to apply the displacement to, but I realize that it makes sense to start a new video here. So I am going to conclude this one and meet you in the next video where we will assign the textures and displacement.